So here we have a sequence of different clips that was submitted by a user, and they mentioned that this was filmed on a Canon camera. And what's interesting is they were saying that they were filming in a standard picture style with highlight tone priority, D+, HDR, PQ on. And as I kind of look through this footage and I'm looking at the scopes, it feels more log. Like it, whenever we're looking at this clip right here, we can clearly see some clouds and there's hardly any information going above the 70 RE scale. So that tells me that I think that this was probably not in standard, or at least recording to the card, it was recording in a log format. So just analyzing the footage, first off, is it looks like we're working with log footage. We can see some clipping. It might not be clipping. It's just probably not be any information above that. So we're going to, okay, here we go. This is definitely some clipping here. And so this is probably going to be in a log format. So we're going to go through and try to color grade this without knowing what particular camera this is on and what profile this was on. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, by analyzing this stuff, I'm going to, okay, so we can take a look at this exposure right here is fine, and then it brightens up right about here, and we see some clipping on the dress here. So this tells me it's supposed to, Canon Log 3 usually clips at 100 RE, but if you're under your native ISO or some other settings that could have been adjusted, can cause some clipping earlier. So the first thing we'll try is we'll just add a conversion LUT and we'll see if we can get this close. And if not, we'll manually do it. So BaseLUTs 2.0, Canon. I'm just going to pick the R6 and we're just going to do Canon C-Log 3. All right, so this is Cinema Gamut, so that's definitely not it because it's oversaturated. So let's try the BT709 version. And we're going to select that here. And it still doesn't quite look right. So this, I mean, if it is, we're going to go ahead and add an exposure adjustment before. I'm just going to take my gamma and pull that down. And it's still missing a little bit of the life to it, which is more in that saturation spectrum right there. But so I feel like that's not the right conversion. And one thing that I'm noticing is I think this might be Canon Log 1, not 3. And I actually have an older LUT that was with our original BaseLUTs. Now we no longer support Canon Log. Most all the cameras shoot Canon Log 3 or Canon Log 1, and Canon Log 3 is much more superior, so we recommend Canon Log 3. But in this case, since this is already shot, we have to work with what we have. Let's go to our LUT, go to our old BaseLUTs, and we're going to do Canon Log. This one is probably Cinema Gamut. Okay, this is probably what it is, Canon Log. Obviously, the greens are a little bit more neon. I don't know which camera. This might be a different generation or a certain sensor on it. But it looks like Canon Log is probably the closest to this profile that this was filmed in. And if that's the case, that means we can add a color space transform and just see if it's somewhat close. So we're going to go ahead and go to Canon Cinema Gamut. We're going to go to Canon Log. We're going to make sure our output is Rec. 7.9, and then our gamma, we're going to do gamma 2.4 for now. I'm just going to turn on DaVinci tone mapping and then saturation compression. And then this is what it presents. It's a much brighter image than this one, but it's still somewhat in the ballpark. So I feel like this is going to be Canon Log. So the two things or three different options. One, we could start with a color space transform. One, we have our old original BaseLUTs, but we don't support those anymore, so I don't quite recommend that. So it might be better to go Canon Cinema Gamut, mainly because this one, we just don't have it anymore. So, or we can manually grade it, which is what we'll actually do on this clip too. So if we do not know the profile or we're just working with the log footage, the primary adjustments are going to be our gamma adjustment, which is going to be our exposure, and then our saturation. Okay, so we're going to create a node here, and we're just going to call this one exposure. And then we're going to do another one after that. It's going to be white balance. All right. So because we have this clipping right here, we know we can't go any higher than that. Let's just go ahead and lift up our gain all the way to 100. Let's just see what that looks like. And then we're going to pull down our gamma until we get skin tone that looks pretty good in the exposure range. We're not trying to, bring everything perfectly to 0 yet. We're just trying to get where the skin tone looks good. And then I'm going to move over to our white balance, which this one, we can see that the skin tone, obviously we're still in log to some extent. We're going to need to add our saturation. And when we add our saturation, you can see that we're getting more life to the image, which is great, but everything is shifted more yellow. So we're going to need to shift everything back over. So I'm going to take my offset and pull it until I get that skin tone lining up on that skin tone indicator line on the vector scope. Now, whenever you do that, it looks like our shadows and everything look more purple. So then we're going to offset that more warm and green, a little bit down here. And then we're going to come back with our gamma, which is our skin tone, pull that down here, kind of cool that off, and then our lift again, we're going to kind of finesse that away from purple. And we're just going to kind of play this little dancing game and just kind of go back and forth until we find what feels pretty pleasing to the shot. Okay? And then looks like our gain we can play with a little bit too if we wanted to. All right, that's looking fairly good right there. All right, so there's before and after. And now let's go back to our exposure and just make sure that the contrast feels decent. So maybe pull down a little bit more of that gamma right there. And then the strong colors of the grass is what's making some clipping here on that spectrum. But overall, I think we created a really good conversion from log. Now, the problem is this adjustment we made, we can apply this to our next clip. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So that's why it's so important to try to use the proper profile and then our BaseLUTs taking into account all the different adjustments. So we might have made an adjustment here that looks really good where you don't need a conversion, and then you come over here and we realize, okay, the blues are just way too, they might be too dense or they might not be pushed in the right space, and that's because we don't have blues in this shot really to finesse. So it's always best to use the proper conversion for the profile because our BaseLUTs are taking into account all the different variance colors and making sure that they're dialed in. So these greens wouldn't be more warm, they should be more, green. And that's where the conversion comes in handy. But so here we have this clip. Let's go to this shot here. Let's go ahead and we have to make an adjustment. Again, before we're adding any creative look, we're just trying to get this sitting nicely. So now we're going to add, after exposure, after white balance, we're going to go ahead and add a primary adjustment. Okay. And this one is going to be primarily focused on these yellows. So I'm going to use the Hue versus Hue curves right here, and you can see this spot. So if I click on yellow, and we can just kind of pull this pretty strong, and then we'll come up. It's always good to kind of push it really strong, and then you can go ahead and tone it back. We're going to go ahead and protect our skin tone here, where we're just making sure that nothing's selected there, and then we just kind of pull this where we want it. So kind of want it more, a little bit closer to the green area, and then we're going to go ahead and come over to our Hue versus Sat, and we're going to do the same thing. But this one, we want to go ahead and make sure that we're locking that. We might pull down the saturation. It doesn't need to be that intense. And then we can kind of come back here, choose that green area. Maybe it's just a little bit right there. Feels nice. And that feels like it's starting to come together. It does look like the luminance of the grass is too bright. And that's where our BaseLUT would come in really handy to kind of finesse all the colors the way they're supposed to. And then you can kind of go to Hue versus Luma. I don't like using this tool because whenever I've done LUT development, it really starts to break apart and fall apart. But this is where you'd kind of get those greens kind of darkening a little bit more, which feels more pleasing to the shot. It's not going to be so distracting and so bright. So we're going to kind of pull this down just a touch. I don't want to go too far because if you go too far, it's going to kind of fall apart. This might be the best option there. And so here we can see this feels really nice. All right, maybe let's just bring it up a little bit more. All right, kind of going back and forth. I could be here all day going back and forth. Okay, now after that, we want to go ahead and take a look at a creative look. So after we've made those adjustments, we can do our creative look. And in this case, I think a great LUT that would be fantastic for this would be from the Emma K pack. So let's take a look at EK Bold. That looks really good, honestly. I think that, let's try another one. So we're going to try the EK Bright. Okay, we're getting more of those pure whites, kind of gentle, lighter greens. And then we have EK Warm. It's kind of a nice vibe there. And then we have EK Soft. EK Soft is probably the most used LUT out of all this, and you can see why. It holds everything together so well. You get really clean, soft skin tones, and it balances fantastically. So I feel like EK Soft might be the best option for this. But again, if I wanted a little bit more of a punch, I could do EK Bold, and you can see it pushes those greens. But in this case, and the skin tone, I think EK Soft would be the best. Lastly, what we could do is we could add a creative look or just an adjustment from one of the tools that I like to use called Gamut Boost. So this one is one of my favorite tools to use to really bring density back into the image and to really protect highlights and stuff like that. In this case, it's bringing back a little bit of detail here. Not too much, though. That's not information we want necessarily, but on the water, that could be more pleasing. And then we're getting a little bit more saturation brought back to the skin tones. Usually that helps a lot with any reflections on skin. But in this case, I think it looks pretty good without it, so I don't really feel like we need to go too harsh. Again, we could probably crank the saturation a little bit more if we wanted that before our primary adjustment. And then also our primary adjustment, I want to just be careful of too much density. That's where things can fall apart. So I'm just going to bring that right back up. And overall, I think this looks really good. So this one is going to be our boost. And we can also change the intensity. Let's go down to our key output. Let's maybe change this to 60%. All right, that looks fantastic. And overall, this is the look. So if we look at before and after, this is not using any conversion LUT. So we went, let's just reverse that. We had our exposure adjustment to kind of spread out that image, that log image. Then we added our white balance adjustment, which is balancing the saturation and any of the skin tones and all those other things. And then we made a primary adjustment. This one is going to be affecting just the greens and stuff like that, okay? Because we felt like that's a little bit off here. And then we added a creative look. That looks great. If we wanted to make another adjustment, we could add a secondary adjustment there, which is kind of what this boost is a little bit. So it's almost, I feel like, a textured one. And overall, this is the look, which looks great. Let's go ahead and copy this adjustment to this clip and see how well it performed. Let me just go ahead and make sure it's the correct adjustments. All right, copy and paste, and then let's go to a shot. All right, so if we're using that same adjustment, we can kind of see there's other issues that we need to kind of take into account. The blues, I feel like, is something that's not quite right. So we're going to go to our primary. We've already kind of fixed a little bit of the greens. We might need to make another adjustment. This is the hue versus sat. Let's pull this green here. Just finessing it a little bit as it goes into skin. Okay, that feels nice. Let's take care of the blues. So we're going to make 2 points here. Let's pull up our vector scope. I'm just going to lift this up just a hair. And you can see where we're spinning that over on this side. And here it's going to be more purple. Here's going to be more cyan. It might lean better. Let's also spread that range out a little bit. And let's go a little bit towards the cyan. I feel like that might look a little pleasing. Okay. Skin tone looks like it's leaning a little too yellow. So we're going to go back to our white balance adjustment. Again, that was for the other clip, so it makes sense that this will probably be a little bit different. And let's just move that until skin gets where we want it. So once we get skin there, then we can kind of zigzag across for our white balance. So this is our tint. And then this is our temperature. So I like to keep the skin right on there. Once you get the tint dialed in, then I can pull it down, stand on that line. And I feel like we're pretty close. Probably right here for skin. That looks really good. And then we can make an adjustment on our lift right here. Kind of pulling that into position. And then our gain, looks like I'm wanting to line up the red, green, and blue a little bit since we're looking at skies and the clouds. And then we can also go back to our exposure and probably just jump that up a little bit more since we're looking at that. Looks great. Let's see, anything else? Okay, and let's go back to the primary. I feel like that's pretty great. And then let's add back our creative LUT. So it looks like we're getting some yellow into the top of the clouds. And we're looking at, we don't see any blue here. We kind of got red and green. And so in this case, I'm going to come over to our gamut curves, or our gamma curves, our curves right here, and we're going to select the blue channel here. I'm just going to make a point right here. And I'm just going to bump this up and just let me take a look at what that's doing. It's doing nothing because I'm not selected on the right node. Let's do that in the primary. All right. So I want to kind of anchor this spot here, and it's just this little top part right here I feel like was a little too yellow. So I'm going to take out, I'm going to make a point right here, pull out a little bit of that red, probably two. Oops, I got to anchor one more here. And then let's do the same for green. Usually this wouldn't have to happen. All these adjustments I never have to make whenever you're working with like the BaseLUTs because it takes into account all these considerations, you know what I mean? So this is looking a lot better. And then we can add our creative look. And let me check the bold version of the EK pack. All right, we have that. And then we have the bright version, which is really intense, and then the warm version. All right. Okay, so let's go with, let's try the bold version. And again, we're going to come back to our white balance and just adjust our saturation to taste, probably. More like 80% feels about right here. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of this shot, just kind of scan through. Looks like we're getting some really good rich skin tones. We just have some issues with the highlights. And in that case, we could make, let me see, adjustments are probably kind of all over the place with how much we're pushing this. But I feel like we're getting like this pink in the highlights, which is not necessarily what we want because it's just changing some of that white point. So one thing that we could do is we could come over to our hue versus, let me see, our luminance versus saturation. Let's go Luma versus Sat. And this means the luminance, we're going to take the brightest part of the image, and then we're going to take the saturation and dial it back. So this area here, let's go ahead, make a point, and then just pull this down. And let's see what this looks like. So we're no longer getting any mixed colors going on in those clouds there, which could be really nice if we're wanting to make sure they're pure white. And honestly, that really feel like that really fixed it. So we're going from here, we're still getting the blue in there, but we're not getting any of that tint that's going on in those highlights and stuff. And this is a really great way if you're wanting to get really clean whites, you can use this tool as well, and I think it performs fantastically. So yeah, so that's a really solid look. And again, if we wanted to pull that boost in there, that boost is just going to make those clouds pop even more. Saturation on the skin is going to look really nice. But this one doesn't really need it. I feel like because we're using the bold version of this LUT, it looks fantastic. All right, looking great. And then let's go to another shot. I'm going to copy this, just paste it here. Okay, I mean, fantastic. See, this one works right here. I feel like we don't have to do much on this one. Looks really good. Let's go to the next clip. All right, we just need to dial back the blues. So maybe let's come to this clip and copy this one instead, since we made some adjustments with the blues. So copy there, paste here, and doesn't look like it made it any better. It's actually worse, to be completely honest. It looks horrible. All right, so let's copy this one, paste this one, come over, check our saturation levels, dial them back a little bit. So everything looks good except for the blues. So then we can come over to the blue spectrum here. And we're in. Another idea you could use besides the Hue versus Sat, you can come over to the slice tool and we can take the blue area right here and we can just pull out any of the blue there. So you can see how it's just pulling in this spectrum right here, and this is the saturation. So that looks good, and then we could change the hue if we want it to be more purple, if we want it to be more cyan. And then if you wanted to change the density of it, you can do it here. Again, this tool can easily cause some issues with artifacting with look development, so just be careful of that. But this, helps it out pretty good. And then we can come back to our exposure if we want to lift up our gamma, kind of get a little bit more light on their face. Feels good. Maybe crank up that gain since we have a lot more headroom there. Pull back that gamma again. It feels good for their skin, and then we can take those shadows, pull them back. There we go. Get some nice contrast. That's looking good. And we have the boost LUT already added, so it's just pulling back all that highlight detail and adding a little bit of saturation. And then we have that creative look that we've added. Just really makes it pop. We can take the EK Bold. Going to be probably not the right choice. Let's go to EK Bright. All right. And then EK Soft. So EK Soft is probably going to be the best one. But I just wanted to show you, we're looking at, you probably noticed the sky falling apart right here. This blue right here. It's probably from the primary adjustment where we're coming through and we're taking that luminance versus sat. Where's that at? I thought we had that adjustment. I guess we didn't make that adjustment in this one. So this one you could probably go ahead and take your Luma and sat and just kind of take that down, and it'll kind of blend it in a little bit better. But you want to be careful of losing too much of that saturation because it's kind of pleasing for the shot. Now whenever we add the EK Bold, yeah, it doesn't look like it's falling apart too much anymore. So let's go back to EK Soft. I liked how gentle that one looked. And honestly, I mean, a black and white might look really good too. Let's see what this one looks. I mean, that looks fantastic too. That's a great shot. That's a great shot. So there's a lot of cool things that you could do, and I feel like we're really tapping into how to be creative when we're working with footage that is not filmed in a profile that we are prepared for. You know what I mean? So just taking this log and converting it, and it looks fantastic, honestly. Let's choose some difficult shots. This one's just the mixed lighting here. So we're going to go ahead and start from scratch on this one. And like we did before, let's start with our exposure. So we can see our clipping point from the candles. So let's crank the gain all the way to 100, maximize that. And then just our lift, pull down a little bit. It's already kind of fairly set up for us. And then we're going to adjust our white balance. You can see that whole spectrum is leaning more yellow. So let's just take our offset, pull that back here. It's looking pretty good. And then our lift, let's probably play with that if we want it to be more green, kind of trying to even it out. You don't want it to feel too unnatural, so it's not like you're trying to make this a white balanced clip. We're wanting to try to keep some of the natural ambiance that is happening. I mean, looks like some natural light coming, and then you have some other yellow tungsten light happening, and you're going to have mixed lighting, so we can't fully necessarily defeat that, but we're going to try to correct it as much as possible. And then we can take our gain, lift that into the white. So I'm kind of focusing on this white shirt and this tablecloth, not this necessarily. And then our gamma, just leaning it more towards pink, and then opposite that for our lift. Okay, now we want to add some saturation. Oops. Let's go ahead and fix that. Saturation now. All right, so let's go to, 60% feels nice right there. Before and after. It's looking pretty good. And then we can go ahead and try and add that EK Soft. Let's see what that looks like. All right, it's going to be more intense, so let's change the intensity from that one. Let's go down to 60%. All right, we'll start there, and then I'm going to come back, lift up my shadows. My gain can really crank. We can blow out those candles. I'm not too worried about the details of those candles. I really care about the skin tone and wanting to see what's taking place. And then the gamma, it's just so warm. Let's just kind of blend it in a little bit more, find that middle ground, and then come back to where those blacks are And we're just going to get to be really careful. It's kind of like just finessing it back and forth. Maybe our gain, we can cool off a little bit more. And in this case, we could try to pull out some of that mixed lighting. There is a tool that we have called, what LUT is this one? This one is going to be from Lux, and we're going to do the interior one right here. So this is going to take out some of the mixed lighting happening here. So it's going to fix some of the yellow, fix some of the blue, kind of balance it out a little bit. And that means we can come back and just kind of work through some of this stuff. I'm going to play with the white balance a little bit more. This is just a tough shot. I just want that skin tone to be closer to that line a little bit. And then if I want to cool it down a little bit more, just enough. All right, that looks great. Let me go ahead and put that tool before it. That might help better. Let's see. Before it, after it. I think I like it before. Okay. And then this is the EK Soft. All right, so this one, again, a tough shot, but I feel like this kind of comes alive again, and we can just, crank that saturation a little more if we want it to pop. So that's how we'd fix a really difficult shot. So obviously going from this scene to this one is very different, making sure the story matches. But overall, I feel like, from not being able to have the proper conversion LUT to this, feels like a really good job. I feel like that's pretty solid there. So overall, I feel like these shots turned out really good. The biggest thing is to really focus on trying to nail the right profile on the camera so that whenever you're using the proper BaseLUT or conversion, it will match across all the scenes. You don't have to do all this extra compensation work. All this extra work that I spent, which is like 85% of this whole sequence, was just fixing that from log. All this wouldn't have to be an issue, and you just go straight into the creative LUT. It saves you so much time. So really highly recommend shoot in a log profile on a camera and then throw on the right conversion LUT, and you will be golden. Everything will look pretty well, fantastic. You won't have to do hardly any other adjustments besides maybe a little bit of exposure and a little bit of white balance, and then you can get straight to your creativity and adding a creative LUT, and everything will shine. So hopefully this was helpful.